world surrounded by franchises, reboots, and shared universes. An elite team of podcasters will risk body and soul to investigate the depths of intellectual properties, one multiverse, subgenre, and trend at a time. Who are we? We're the IP Squad.
Welcome back to the IP Squad and our ongoing investigation of the Alien and Predator franchises and the franchise they come to make together. I'm John Campbell. My partner for this investigation, Mike Ergoni.
It's me analyzing the weird little babies that come and erupt out of things that come together. That was a bad transition, but this is a bad movie, so I think it's fine.
Yeah, folks, we got, we did, this has been an interesting run because these are really separate franchises for a while. And I don't just mean but they're like, we had 2 Alien movies, then 2 Predator movies. Now we're going to have two more Alien movies. It's like, and then they'll come together. But it's really interesting that they're not even running parallel to each other, really.
No, and obviously jumping back in, we're covering Alien 3 today.
No, Gergoni, you have the title wrong. We're covering Alien Cube today.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. The poster here says 3 times the suspense, 3 times the danger, 3 times the terror, which would imply that it's multiplied 3 by 3 times. I got you. Okay.
Yeah, there it is. They've done the math on this for you. All right.
Yeah. Copy.
This is kind of early in the stupid titles of sequels, but the idea of putting it, Alien to the Third Power.
Why do that? I wonder. Is it just because math equals space?
I think it's it's sci-fi, right?
Oh boy. All right. Yeah, sure. Because there's nothing inherently multiplicative about this film.
No,
right?
in fact, they actually have reduced the number of aliens in this one.
And characters that we like.
Yeah. Are there any? Okay. Man, where to even start? Because look, we've long been this is sort of the dark shadow in the distance, right, or whatever that we've been, fearful of, because neither one of us are fans of this movie, obviously.
We were riding high on a ramp of these first 4 movies we talked about, not even considering the precipice that awaited us once we hit the top of that ramp with Predator 2. And Predator 2 was maybe a bumpier ride than we were expecting, but still enjoyable.
It's still a fun ride, yeah. This movie is aggressively not fun. Definitively seeks to be unfun at every turn.
Correct. And it's a weird departure from the Alien movie that is maybe the most fun.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. After the rollicking action adventure that is the second movie, which is such a rousing crowd pleaser of a blockbuster film, this is this movie's a mess for a lot of reasons, but I don't know that I've ever seen, and I've talked to people who were around when this came out, and we'll get to it. Like everything, this movie has its defenders, of course, but
sure.
But I do know from a lot of people I've talked to who saw this when it came out, what a fucking slap in the face. I don't know that I've ever seen a sequel just give a middle finger to the audience as much as this one does. If you enjoyed that last one, fuck you.
Right out of the gate, it's just remember those characters that made it by the skin of their teeth out of the last movie? Yeah. Fuck them.
Yeah. Fuck them, and fuck you for liking them. That's what you get.
Yeah, look, I don't know how deep we wanted to get into the production kerfuffle that is Alien 3.
We have to, right? Because I watched this movie yesterday for the first time. This is only the second time I've seen it. This was a movie I intended never to watch again.
Wow. I've seen it a few times.
Have you seen the assembly cut?
I have seen the assembly cut,
okay,
yes.
Yeah. Which is, I've also seen the assembly cut. Actually, the first time I saw this, I saw the assembly cut because I had heard that is better. And it's clearer. There are things in it that make more sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is one of those movies.
It's
where
not a director's
watching
cut, though.
it.
That's why we call it the assembly cut. That was
Sure.
made very clear, because we should say, overarching the whole thing, he's on the record, David Fincher, as saying nobody hates this movie more than me.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is one of those movies where you can feel the jagged cuts that the editing room made, and that's never a great thing for a film.
No.
But specifically, there can be movies where you're just like, wait, hold on, I think we're missing like 10-15 minutes, and that's 100% true in this movie.
Oh yeah,
there are characters that just vanish. There are ways in which the characters react to the doctor just vanishes. He gets in his TARDIS and he leaves.
The thing I was that was setting me up to say, like, I watched this movie yesterday, and then I immediately watched the very interesting, far more compelling hour-long documentary about the making of this movie that I highly actually recommend, because it is a fascinating example of studio franchise filmmaking and the bad side of it.
Wasn't that included in the like quadrilogy
Blu-ray
set?
It was. Yeah. I went on YouTube and watched it because I no longer have the quadrilogy. I had the quadrilogy on DVD and Blu-ray, but when it went to 4K, I finally just bought Alien and Aliens, because those are the only
realizing that you only needed half of it.
Yeah, I really only like those two movies, so I have the 4Ks of those. So this one, though, I watched on Hulu, and then went on YouTube, and thankfully somebody had uploaded that full documentary, which I said is actually so fascinating. But yes, I do want to talk about that, because I think almost all the problems from this movie stem from that development and production process.
Yeah, the fact that there are way too many cooks in the kitchen. Not even cooks in the kitchen. There is a stratified layer of development that happens here. And in certain Hollywood productions, you can have like eras of a film production, right? In which like certain writers are attached to the film, or certain directors are attached to the film. So the film will start to take shape in some direction. But then due to whatever circumstance, those writers or directors leave the production. And so the producers of the film are left with the choice to either start over from nothing or attempt to build on what's already there and try to like ham-fistedly shift it into the vision of a different writer/director.
So this film is so, like I said, I mean, I can't recommend that documentary enough. This film, David Fincher was the third director attached to this movie. To say what draft this was, they went into shooting with no script, almost. Basically no finished script, just pieces.
Because the credited writers on this film are Dan O'Bannon, Ronald Shusett, and Vincent Ward. And by all accounts, those three had like the last polish on a lot of this stuff.
Not those
but they're
three.
Dealing
O'Bannon
with
and Shusett did. Vincent Ward was actually the second director hired. That's why he has
they're
the
also
story
their last pass is on his iteration of the script, though, right?
Kind of. So I got to do this chronologically, or else.
We need a forensics expert to figure this out.
So I've become an expert on the production of Alien 3 in the last couple days. I've read as much as I could find about it, and watched that documentary, but because it's so fascinating. This is an amazing story of Hollywood hubris. Aliens hit. It was massive. An even bigger sequel to an already huge movie, right? So everybody's like, obviously we're making Alien 3, and everybody's like, what is that? Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea what to do next, basically. Aliens, of course, 1986. 1986. This is 1992. So that's a fair amount of time between sequels.
Especially when there's like heavy producer and studio demand for it.
Yeah, everybody wants this to happen. Nobody's sure what it is. They don't know who's going to make it. Cameron doesn't want to make doesn't want to make the next one. They did briefly talk to Ridley Scott about coming back. He was uninterested. But nobody even knows nobody knows if Sigourney wants to make another one. So immediately their first thought is, okay, let's prepare for the scenario that Sigourney doesn't come back. And that leads to the William Gibson screenplay.
Right. Famed sci-fi author
science
William
fiction,
Gibson.
William Gibson, which I did in research for this, go and read the comic book adaptation of his screenplay, which Dark Horse published, which is very interesting. It sidelines Ripley. The idea being, the studio's idea was, all right, let's prepare a movie where Ripley's still around but not in it, so that conceivably, if she doesn't want to do this one, maybe we can convince Sigourney to come back for Alien 4. Was the thought process. So the it's a Bishop and Hicks adventure, is what that version of it was. And actually,
and Michael Biehn, let's go.
I think also they were more affordable, right? Like, I think was another thought process too. Was Sigourney might come back, but how much do we have to pay her? But okay, so reading that, having actually read that now, or at least the comic book adaptation of it, it's pretty good. Okay, I think it's pretty good. The big problem is, of course, it doesn't have Ripley. But I would say the whole thing is set on a Weyland-Yutani research ship. And it's it's very, I do think the thing for me personally, and look, it's what I would have wanted the third movie to be, which is heavily about the corporation as villain, which this movie only kind of, it's in there a little bit, but it really does, like, okay, it shows Weyland-Yutani actually get their hands on an alien, on a xenomorph. And the whole idea is that they want to clone these things. Well, they clone it and end up making something monstrous. So the whole thing is their clone of an alien, of a xenomorph, on board this research ship with Hicks and Bishop.
Which, honestly, there are some ideas there that will carry forward into the franchise. And if you've seen Alien Romulus,
which I haven't,
spoiler for you have not yet, so I'm not going to talk too deeply about it. But like, there is ideas there that the rest of the franchise will use, and even in something like Alien versus Predator, there's more of the like Weyland as bad guy.
Well, that's always the center of it,
theme.
right? Is that the alien is a force, and Weyland-Yutani is the actual villain, because the alien is just a thing; it's just function on instinct. But this idea, like, but Gibson gets heavy. Surprise, surprise! Into like sci-fi, the sci-fi novelist gets heavy into the themes of like, this thing is already super dangerous, but when you start mucking with it and fucking around with making your own version of it, you're creating something even more monstrous. And so it's pretty decent. Like I said, I don't know that it's like, oh, that would have been the great Alien 3, but it's certainly much closer to the mark than what they ended up getting. So anyway, that exists. Check out the comic. It's a really fascinating read as an alternative, to what
totally. And I think there's a novelization of it as well.
There is. They also, I haven't listened to it, but Audible did an audio drama of it with Biehn and Henriksen.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I need that. That I want to check out next. They turned into which you can get on Audible, which is not a sponsor, but but yeah, that's pretty cool that you can actually listen to it with the actors who play those characters.
And be warned that on Audible, there's also the Alan Dean Foster novelization of this movie,
which has one of my favorite things. If you read the little Alan Dean Foster trivia, it's pretty awesome about this. But which I'll get to when we get to it. But so that was one of the drafts they had in the hopper. They had David Twohy, who we know as the creator of the Riddick franchise.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote a draft of this that just was pitch black. He literally took his draft for Alien 3 and made pitch black.
Good for him.
He was brought in to go, what if nobody comes back? And he's like, okay, prison ship crash lands on a planet. There's aliens.
Yeah. That's actually an interesting, the planet is Fiorina 161, but everyone in the movie just calls it Fury. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, the Furians will, of course, be the name of the species for Riddick himself.
They come from Furia. And
they're just so angry.
I believe that at least the plan is that the fourth one will be called Riddick Furia.
That's everything I've seen about it, yes.
Yeah. Which make that happen, by the way, because I think we're both probably in agreement on Pitch Black, one of the maybe the best Alien ripoff, like in terms of like, that one's really solid. I like that movie a lot, and I love that whole franchise.
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that they're like, so that was that, which was a great enough pitch that he just turned it into another movie. So you have that, and then finally they bring in they bring in Rennie Harlan, who's coming off of the success for Fox of Die Hard 2, which was massive, right? So and Rennie Harlan's like, great, but if I'm going to do this, I want to totally reinvent this thing. I want it to be like the second movie was, in that it's a totally different shift from the first movie. And they're like,
is this where we get Wood Planet?
No, that's where that'll get us to Vincent Ward.
Okay.
But Rennie Harlan's point is basically they start writing this thing. He's working on the Gibson draft, and he quits because he's like, you at every turn, what's very interesting, both him and Vincent Ward are in the documentary. David Fincher's not. The two guys who didn't make this are in the documentary, and the guy who actually did wouldn't talk to them for this documentary. But Harlan said, like, he just got frustrated because eventually he was like, at every turn they just kept going like, yeah, but we want like corridors where they're chasing people around, because that's the same shit that's in those other. I said I didn't want to just rip off Ridley, and so he basically left out of frustration with like, I don't want to make just another Alien movie. I want to put my stamp on it. And so he quits, goes and makes Cliffhanger, which it turned into a huge hit. Because it rules. But that's neither here nor there. But so then you get to Vincent Ward. They hire this guy who they're like, okay, maybe the answer is do what we did with Ridley, and bring in like an artsy guy. And so they get this guy, Vincent Ward, who had made a movie before this. He's a filmmaker from New Zealand. He had made a movie called The Navigator, which is a movie
unfamiliar.
about. It's a super artsy movie about the plague.
Oh, cool. Fun.
The Navigator, a medieval. I think you'd probably dig it, Gergani.
Yeah. It's called The Navigator: A Medieval Odyssey. Yeah, I'd probably dig it.
Yeah. I will just say, the idea that they thought this guy was going to transition into studio franchise filmmaking is because this guy also made What Dreams May Come, the Robin Williams. Like, this guy's an art filmmaker. And so his whole thing is he comes in with this pitch about, I want it to be an alien on a planet of monks. And but I want to go the opposite way of everything, which is wood. And this is where you get Wood Planet. The idea is that unlike any sci-fi thing we've ever seen, instead of being made out of metal, everything's made out of wood. Because once again, look at the films this guy has made. That's what he's thinking. He's an artist first and foremost, right? So he's going like, fascinating. And he said that it just kept, that at every turn, similar to the Rennie Harlan thing, he just kept going like, yeah, and then like the alien like bites a guy in half, right? Or something like that. And he's like, I mean, yeah, but what about the wood plant? Like, it just seems like a huge clash of problems. But because of he gets a story by credit because of the religious elements of this.
Right. They like secluded monks get turned into prisoners who have found religion.
Because they took a little bit of the David Toohey prisoner. Like what ends up happening is this movie becomes a kind of hodgepodge of all these ideas, right? You take David Toohey's convict idea, you throw in the monks, and you combine them together into now they're convict monks, you know.
And somehow in all of this, we circle back around to Sigourney Weaver by backing up a dump truck of money.
Basically, yeah.
Which is also why she gets a producer credit on this.
Yeah. No, they paid her a fucking fortune. Because the other thing that happens in this time is Fox has put out a number of bombs. So by the time this is happening, they need this movie. Because they're like, well, that's a hit. That's a given. We know Alien 3 is big. So they set a release date. And that's actually why Vincent Ward quit the project. It's just like, I don't think we're ready to shoot. They're like, you have to, because the movie has to come out next summer.
Mm-hmm. So he quits while they're still in pre-production, right?
They're building sets. When they bring in Fincher, this is his first film. This is the feature film debut of David Fincher, who at this point
done like music videos
and commercials, and like really innovative ones. He had done stuff for Nike. He'd done music videos for Madonna. I don't know if he's the first of these guys. Well, Ridley,
did he do the 1984 Apple commercial?
No, that was Ridley Scott.
That was Ridley Scott.
But Ridley had come from commercials as well. So, I mean, in some ways they talk about, it sort of makes sense, right? Like, these were visualist guys. But he's part of this whole generation of him, Michael Bay, Antoine Fuqua. These music videos were the F. Gary Gray into directing. It sort of made sense, right? Those were sort of their short films. So they hire him, but the thing with him is they don't have a finished script. They go, we don't have a finished script, so you've got to finish the script. And 2, we've already built a bunch of the sets. You have to use these. So they talk about he and one of the other writers here. They talk in the documentary about them walking around. I think it's David Giler. They were walking around the sets going, what could be a scene in here?
Jesus.
So there's already all this stuff built, and they have to figure out. They have to reverse engineer a story out of locations,
which is honestly kind of a gift to a writer if you're forced into that situation, simply because having to invent something out of totally whole cloth is, I think, a lot more difficult than like, okay, here's the spark of an idea, even if it's just a location. At least where like improvisational storytelling is concerned, that gives you somewhere to start.
I mean, it's purposely how Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie make the Mission Impossible movies, right? They do that to themselves.
Yeah, because they're psychos.
Yeah. But those are the best movies. So, but it is just like, I don't know, man. Tom wants to jump off this thing. How do we reverse engineer a story that leads to Tom jumping off a mountain, which actually sounds super fun to me. But this thing is, obviously, so the pressure's on for this thing. I do love, and like I said, then they have all these pieces of other scripts. And so this movie kind of, the reason I went through all this, and like you said, how much you want to get into the production, is because like all of that, you can feel all of that in the movie. It's a mess. This movie's just a mess.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of brings us to the Sigourney Weaver of it all, right? Because she is the pillared structure that is the foundation of the Alien franchise at this point.
And particularly the idea that this movie had to be her. I think this is the one where it's like, all right, Fox has made it clear this franchise doesn't work without her.
Yeah.
Maybe if they had done Gibson.
That's just another production note, though. Like, does it have to be her in this weird prison planet? No.
Yeah, because there were two, Gibson and Tui's Gibson's script went with Bishop and Hicks as the leads. Tui's script created, I don't know who he was, but basically Riddick, right? The idea that there would have been, Tui talked about wanting to create a new action hero for the franchise, this convict character who, basically becomes Riddick. But by this point, they get all around to. Do you know about the teaser trailer for this movie, too? I'm obsessed with the teaser trailer for this movie. So a year before it comes out, they release a teaser trailer.
Again, production has not started on this film.
They haven't shot any of it. They don't even have a finished script because the teaser trailer shows. Here I have the tagline from it. In 1979, we discovered in space, no one can hear you scream. In 1992. We will discover on Earth, everyone can hear you scream. And then it would have been the planet Earth. You can watch this teaser on YouTube. The planet Earth shows up, and then Alien 3, they're coming here. So they released a teaser trailer for a movie that didn't exist, and then ended up not being the plot of the movie.
And it sounds like was never the plot of the movie.
I think not. No, I don't think there's any drafts for an Earthset one. I think that was like discussed. Right. Yeah.
I've been doing some reading about the production of the movie we're talking about next week, and it sounds like there was like vague plans to set chunks of that movie on Earth, and even those fell apart.
That one's a mess too for different reasons. Like it's just like this franchise. They had two very clear visions for those first two movies from two very strong-willed directors. And then here they can't find a director, end up hiring a guy who, they are correct, will become a defining director of his generation. One of the things that's really weird is like they're going to treat this guy like shit when like they hired him because they thought he had potential. They're right. They just fuck him over big time.
Right. Yeah. And the guy who goes and makes fucking 7 is going to be a good director.
That's the one thing that he can be thankful for. This is one of the producers on this movie got the script for 7 and was like, Fincher might really nail this. And that they talk about the only reason he has a career is because that guy knew what he was. And in every interview, Sigourney Weaver was for this movie. Sigourney Weaver was like, they fucked him. That guy's great, and she was very much clear, like, don't blame David Fincher. That guy's fantastic. They talk about, like, he can thank Sigourney Weaver for a lot of his career for just being like, please, you should hire him. Do not take this movie as indicative of his skills. And obviously that's correct.
We'll talk about the problems of this movie. I don't think she's one of them.
No, I don't think so either. I think it sounds like she and Fincher are trying. They're the two people trying to corral all these other voices and ideas into anything that makes sense.
And she's really protective of the Ripley character. There's some quote I saw about how she insisted on O'Bannon and Shusett being brought back because she felt like they were some of the only people who could like get Ripley's voice.
She says that in the documentary too. Yeah, that she was like, I want the last pass to be the guys who wrote the original movie. Because
admirable. Yeah, but again, they're dealing with such a heaping pile of nonsense at this point that they can only try to like retroactively make it make sense.
Because my notes aren't really, my problems with them aren't really about the character of Ripley.
I mean, I've got my problem isn't necessarily the character of Ripley. Ripley herself, given this film, is great. I think the problem stems from this whole like the setup, right? It's like the premise.
Well, it's this movie. I was watching this yesterday, and like I said, for the first time in years, and like, of course, we acknowledged it already. Like, obviously, I'm pissed in opening minutes of this movie because they kill off Hicks and Newt unceremoniously off screen. There's a great Michael Bihn's in the documentary. They never called him.
So that's just a mannequin that's full of blood. Yeah.
But he did. But they talked about it. He goes, they never even asked me to be in it. Like, it wasn't like a thing where I was busy or something. They never even considered it. But he did say, I heard somebody said they were doing the mannequin. They actually talked about they spent more time on the mannequins than they did on the alien creature.
Well, and the production of the creature for this movie also takes like fascinating twists and turns. How it does eventually get back to Geiger is just like a roller coaster of, no, they're handing off the production of the creature to like all these different people, and eventually we get back to Geiger.
But the only thing that I love Bean talked about was he had heard that they made it in the original idea. They were going to find Hicks's body having had a chest burster blow out of him. And Bean apparently was like, fuck that shit. They can kill me off, but they can't make me the reason there's an alien. And so it was basically like, I will not give my permission for my likeness to be used if that's how you're going to do it.
Good for him.
Yeah, I love that about him. And he goes, he's like, you can, because they were going to pay me money to have that. And he goes, and I said, no amount of money. He's like, I was a stupid young guy. I probably should have just taken the money and not given a shit. But, it's like, whatever. But he talked about it. But he's like, and he did give his permission for his picture to be used. They had to get that.
Sure.
Yeah. But, but my point is, okay, ignoring that, the movie it's not like, oh, well, okay, the movie lost me there. I mean, it did. But the movie's a mess on top of that. Like, what it does to aliens is a fucking disaster. We're both in agreement on that. We can move past that. That's not the whole problem here by any stretch of the imagination.
I mean, part of the problem, and look, we can talk about how seriously we might take certain franchises compared to other ones.
Yeah.
And how that might be the issue here, not necessarily the film itself. But there is this idea with a sequel, right?
Yeah.
Especially a sequel in which you have a continuing narrative going.
Right.
That builds on certain themes, or the character goes through some sort of arc over the course of the continued narrative, right? In a Friday the 13th sequel, there's usually never any returning characters other than Jason Voorhees. So we're not caring about the moral arc of what teenagers are getting killed this
Not
week.
really, no. Maybe between a couple movies, but not as a whole.
But the arc of Ripley goes from, okay, even the obscure background character can take charge and like wield their own destiny, to this meditation on motherhood and trying to commit yourself to loving other people. And then it just like completely drops the ball here to alien bad.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about this. If you remove Ripley from this movie, I'm not sure I would like this movie, but I would certainly have less problems with it if it was just Alien loose in prison.
And Alien bad, yeah.
Fine. This would probably remember as like, oh yeah, that prison one.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have quite the vitriol it has from a lot of the fan base.
And look, I'm a weird defender of Alien Resurrection, but part of that
I don't hate Alien
from
Resurrection, but I wouldn't call
Sure.
myself a defender.
And we'll get into more of this when we're talking about the movie, but part of what makes that movie work for me is because they have Ripley go in an interesting direction.
Yeah, I will say, because that's the thing about this, right? Not only does it feel like this movie doesn't work for a lot of reasons, but yeah, you were talking about as a man, you're like, what does this do? Because at least in the moment, this was considered the end of the story. I mean, this is designed to be the end of the trilogy.
It is a grim finale on a woman's life that is torn literally to shreds over the course of several
My point is sort of like,
weeks.
what am I left to think of the character of Ellen Ripley if this is her 3-act story? It is sort of a thing we're talking about. Like, I don't know that this does anything other than just going like I just leave this movie going like, this poor fucking woman never had a chance, did she? Like, just her life is just constantly shit on by the world and stuff like that.
There's not even, I could see a movie similar to this in a lot of respects in which the focus becomes just how much Weyland-Yutani has like screwed her over, will kill anyone and everything to get what they want, which is part of her like rallying speech in the third act of this movie.
Yeah.
But there is no triumph over Weyland-Yutani other than simply depriving them of what they want.
Right. And and by the way, they shot and reshot this ending many times, right? There were so many different endings to this movie. Because this movie also, production was it's like the first AD. One of the people on this movie was talking about like, we didn't finish production we didn't wrap Alien 3. We stopped filming Alien 3. Yeah, they shot for like 100+ days in England, had him cut the movie, and then extensively reshot in Los Angeles. Went back again and again and again. The biggest thing in this movie is they had to make that release date, and nobody was on the same page about what this movie should be.
So they were just like panic filming and hoping that something worked out in the end.
Bringing in other people. the editor of the movie, the editor they brought in actually after the fact, they talked to him and they go like, they said, we want you to work on Alien 3. And he said, okay. And they're like, we're going to need you for like a year. And he's like, okay, well, that's a lot of money, right? Like, but it was just
that's a steady paycheck.
Basically just going like, hey man, get ready, because this thing's a mess. We have no idea what this thing is. It came in at a 3-hour cut initially. Like, it's just... And
whatever producer changed it from an ox to a dog needs to get slapped. That's all I'm saying. Because in the assembly cut, there's like this whole like cow that gets infected.
Correct.
And in the finished like production of it,
it
becomes this dog. Yeah.
And actually, like I said, I think I've only ever seen the assembly cut. So watching this, I was like, oh, right. Or like I remembered all the Paul McGann stuff. And none of that's in there.
No, Paul McGann.
Paul McGann's in the movie, but
yeah, but there's a whole thing in the assembly cut where like they trap the alien, but then Paul McGann's character like lets it out because he's been driven insane by the love of the creature he's seen killing.
It's actually my favorite thing in Alien 3, and it's only in the assembly cut, which is this idea of a guy who's like, this is a dark angel. I'm obsessed. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. A guy who doesn't want it, like all the characters we see, helping, quote unquote, the alien are always for the capitalistic thing. Here's a guy who's just fucking nuts and views this as like, I worship this thing. That's cool. That's like Lovecraftian shit,
Yeah, well, because it plays into this idea of people stared out into the void. They saw this perfect organism, and at some point, somebody would have gone like, "Oh my god, it's beautiful."
I know.
Like, there's a little bit of that in the Prometheus movies specifically.
Yeah,
with all the David stuff.
Yeah, yes, and actually, to me, that's the best stuff in those movies by far.
Sure.
Mainly because Fassbender is one of the greatest actors alive, but That has a lot to do with it. I'll watch that guy do anything, but yeah, all that stuff goes away, and they talk about that. That was a studio note going, well, if they could capture it, then it's less frightening. It makes it less intimidating if it could be captured, was why that was cut.
But it's so much scarier that it could like infect someone's brain.
I know. And I mean, and then Paul McGann, who's in the documentary, is like, yeah, a bunch of my friends went and saw it, and they were like, were you in that?
He's barely in it.
He's barely in it, yeah.
He's in 2 scenes, I think. The one where they're walking around and it starts killing people, and then the infirmary scene where Charles Dance gets it as well.
Yeah. Oh, and Charles Dance is set up as a major character and then gets taken out of this movie unceremoniously.
Charles Dance is Ripley's love interest? I mean, they have sex. I don't know if love interest is the right way.
And that feels so weird and unearned when they do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's Ripley using her sexuality to avoid answering a question in a way that is like not built on her character. It feels so like femme fatale, right? Which Ripley's never really been up to this point.
No, she's a take charge kind of woman, but like when we meet her, she's a blue collar, union
space trucker.
Yeah, space trucker, right? And then the second movie turns her into a warrior, which is awesome. Now she's a soldier with a gun, and she fucking rules. And then, in this movie, she's not Ripley in this movie. But because of the movie they're making, it's a really weird use of her character.
The whole character is just alien bad.
Right. It's just like now, and you talk about one of the big problems with this movie, and add this to the list because there's like 18 big problems with this movie. But one of them is I don't like anyone. I don't think. The only character I like is Charles S. Dutton.
Yeah, Charles S. Dutton, who plays Dylan.
Yeah,
which didn't get confusing at all.
You son of a bitch. No,
I like Charles Dance's character well enough, just because Charles Dance is charismatic.
No, and actually, I will say, they have some great actors in this movie. Charles Dance, Paul McGann, Brian Glover.
This movie is just flooded with people who are just hanging around Pinewood Studios.
Yeah, I mean, Postlewaite shows up and does nothing, and I'm like, fucking, why you got Postlewaite? Guy's amazing.
I was watching this movie this morning. I was like, I swear I remember more Postlewaite in this, but then I realized I was conflating scenes of this movie and Romeo plus Juliet.
By the way, Postlewaite may be the best part of Lost World.
Oh, easy.
He rules in that movie. Like, he's a guy who could come in and deliver. You got Holt McCallany in this, who's I will say best thing for him is getting in this because he becomes a Fincher regular.
Totally.
Yeah, and of course people would know him from Mindhunter. But just like you've got, because they're shooting in England, like all the day players are like classically trained stage veterans and stuff who are coming in, but then they don't do anything with them. And the decision to make everyone bald kind of also makes them uniform in a way that like it makes it hard visually.
In the last act of this movie, when they're all running around lead pouring trenches, you cannot tell anyone apart.
No, and the script hasn't done a good enough job really making you care about any of them anyway. I mean, unfortunately, one of the reasons Charles S. Dutton is he's black and has glasses.
Yeah, and this is a movie where you were given certain parameters right out of the gate of like, okay, 25 people here. You immediately have a countdown of bodies, right?
Yeah.
And then at some point in the film, you just totally lose track of everybody. So the tension is just gone. All that's there is just screams on the soundtrack.
This movie wants to go back more to the feeling of the first movie where there's un-alien loose and there's way more kills, but it's so much less scary.
Because half the kills come down to, and this is maybe going into the rush production a little bit, any time we focus on the xenomorph, it feels awkward. Mm-hmm. Like there's some rotoscoping and stop motion animation and some suit work here. Some of the suit work's okay, but like the stop motion animation is pretty glaring, and that's not just
Yeah.
because it was a product of its time. I've seen stop motion stuff that still looks damn good.
Ed 209 from RoboCop, man, still fucking rules.
Yeah. But so we'll have these sequences where like the xenomorph doesn't look great. Clearly somebody was aware of that fact. So you'll have these kills that are literally just Sam Raimi POV rushing at these guys, and then we'll just see a blood splatter as they like basically an alien bullet hits them.
All of that stuff. I mean, here's the thing about the movie. It looks good because Fincher knows how to fucking shoot a thing. Like, there are great little visual moments, but none of it adds up to anything. And I like the way that those Steadicam speed shots are filmed, but they're yeah, exactly. They become a crutch. And yeah, it does just feel like at a certain point, we're just upping the body count. It's just like, here's a guy, grabbed him. Here's a guy, grabbed him.
You know what my least favorite part about this movie is, actually?
What's that?
And it really sunk in on a rewatch. I mean, least favorite thing is that they killed Newt. That's my number one problem with this film.
Wait, hang on. Before you say that, just because I'm glad you gave me this opening. Alan Dean Foster. I love this little piece of trivia I mentioned.
The guy who wrote the novelization.
The guy who wrote the novelization turned in his draft of the novelization and refused to kill Newt in the novel. He's like, Newt's pod was expelled into another part of the thing, and he was just like, I will not fucking kill Newt. How fucking dare you? And they were like, you have to. And so he was under threat of being fired, wrote that Newt died in the novel. But he was so pissed.
Yeah.
And I love that. He's just like, no way, man. That's bullshit.
So, that's absolutely true. Go Alan Dean Foster.
Yeah, Alan Dean Foster rules. We love Alan Dean
Foster. Second biggest problem I have with this movie.
Yeah.
How long it takes the alien to kill anybody.
So long.
There's so much time for people to go, get it off me, get it off me, get it off me. Yeah. Whereas every other instance, the only time that's really happened in previous alien movies is if someone gets like a facehugger on them or if they get splashed with acid, right? Yeah. Otherwise, if an alien's on top of you, you're just dragged up into the rafters and you vanish or you're immediately dead.
I mean, that's the thing about like I said, there are way more kills in this, yet every kill in the first movie I remember because they're all so well done. And so, the only time you really have that grab is when Dallas gets grabbed in the first movie. And it's great. It's one of the great jump scares in movie history. Like,
yeah, I feel like
every one of these
who plays like the warden of the prison?
Oh, that's Brian Glover.
Brian Glover plays Andrews. His death sticks out to me because you have this like beat of him with the stress ball the whole movie, and then when he gets dragged up in and the stress ball just bounces on the bloody floor, that was pretty good.
Well, those are the kind of moments that like Ridley did find those little moments, right? We talk about like the dripping chains and stuff like that. Even moments the deaths feel so visceral in Aliens because Cameron did such a good job of making you care about every one of those. Even though, similar to this movie, he had a bunch of Marines, like this movie is a bunch of convicts, you knew each of those people, at least to some extent.
You got a character trait right out of the gate.
Yeah, and we're endeared to a lot of them. Here, not only does everyone look the same, it's on record if they're all horrible human beings.
Yeah, we're established pretty early on that on this prison planet, it's nothing but murderers and rapists. And the people who are left here are people who were already a part of the prison, but got converted to some kind of weird religion. And so when Weyland-Yutani pulled out of here, they were like, oh yeah, and these weirdos can stick around and help basically be janitors in this big rundown smelting facility.
It's one of those things where the idea of this being a mash of things, the prisoners that are also like religious zealots feels like a hat on a hat to me, where it's like, hey, did you want to make a monks or prisoners? Now, maybe something could have been done, but I'm not saying that you couldn't write something like that. But the way it feels is it's just like, they're prisoners, but we kind of also wanted to be monks, so jam those ideas together.
Well, I mean, you have Keith David's character from Pitch Black that is that, right?
Yep.
But there's like one character. That's his interesting trait.
Well, I mean, I'm sure since he basically turned into Pitch Black, Tui's script was better. Like, I mean, all the characters in Pitch Black are, I mean, at least what it became in that movie, all those characters are pretty well defined.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To the point where when you replace one of them in Chronicles of Riddick
we all
with a character Yeah, we were all just like, I don't think that's the same character. She looks real weird and different.
Yeah, that's a completely different. Okay, all right, fine. Yeah, it's just well. The other thing you bring up about that too is it does feel like you do sort of lose the thread because she does just sort of end up on this planet, like by happenstance, right?
Yeah, it's
So
totally random.
this whole idea, because that's a big thing in Gibson's script, is like, oh, their rescue ship got diverted to this Weyland-Yutani research base because in that the idea is that before the queen died, so there's an egg on the ship is the thing. Nobody got infected with a chest
which
burster.
is in this movie too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that they took from
in this. There's 2 eggs. Because one infects Ripley and one gets the dog, and usually when a facehugger gets somebody, it then dies when it falls off.
Yeah, so I guess there were 2. Okay, fine.
But that's not established. We just see one
in
the opening scenes.
Well, and then it turns into this really grim. The whole movie is so like haunting, not in a good way, because like pretty quickly, maybe about halfway through the movie, we find out that that Ripley has an alien in her.
Yeah, about like a little over an hour, because this movie is just comes in under 2 hours.
That was a big note from Fox, was get it under 2 hours no matter what.
Just to get more screenings in, I'm sure.
That's exactly what their thought was. Yeah, this can't be more than, like I said, he turned in a 3-hour cut, which obviously would be too long. But they were like, no, under 2. Sub 2, no question. And eventually the final edit had no Fincher involvement, as you might imagine.
Yeah, which is part of why he disowns this film.
Oh, yeah, and that's why even when they did the assembly cut, they said, would you want to do a director's cut? And he said, no. The only way to make a director's cut is to burn everything and start again, he said.
What vitriol.
Yeah, he's like, based on what I was forced to shoot and put through, there is no movie I could make out of those pieces that I would be happy with.
That is just like a thunderous. You so rarely hear directors being like, my movie was taken from me.
Oh, I've never heard a direct. Well, I mean, maybe, well, very rarely do you hear a director just go like, oh no, that has nothing to do with me. Like, and just be like I said, I mean, he is like, I hear the fans hate Alien 3. He goes, you don't hate it as much as me. No one hates that movie as much as me. Like, he's just so. And Fincher is not like an extreme guy. He's not out there with hot takes left and right, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But he has been pretty clear about he's never made another movie where he didn't get final cut. That's it.
Yeah, and I mean, look, pretty good track record.
I basically like. It's so weird that his first movie is, I think, the only movies I would say I don't like. To varying degrees, I like other movies of his, but I basically like everything he's made, including some of my like Zodiac. I think Zodiac and Social Network are 2 of my favorite movies ever made. So you know, like, and I will always go to bat for his Girl with the Dragon Tattoo movie. I think that was criminally underseen. It's an amazing movie.
I don't know if I have like a favorite Fincher movie necessarily. He's one of those directors where his subject matter is so like generally not.
I was going to say
vibing with me, right? I was going to
say, I think Fincher and I are on a similar wavelength that maybe isn't make a lot of genre stuff.
I liked his episode of Love, Death, and Robots.
Oh, I mean, he was a big hand in that. Because one of the reasons he got hired for this too was he came from animation and special effects. He started ILM. So that was a big thing. Another reason they hired him was they thought this process would go quicker because here's a guy who knows how to do special effects. What they also didn't realize, though, is they were hiring a guy famous for his meticulous, perfectionism. Because he's a guy famous for doing like 100 takes of a scene. I don't know if he was doing that on this as his first movie, but that's certainly how he works now. Is he does 90 to 100 some takes of everything.
I guess Fight Club is my favorite movie of his.
Okay.
Filmography.
Yeah, I mean that would.
That seems like a basic pick, right? But
that's a common one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love pretty much all his movies. I'm not as hot as on Benjamin Button, which people might expect. I don't dislike it though. There's some great stuff in it. It's too long.
I really did like the music video for the Karen O and Trent Reznor cover of Immigrant Song. So
and you've got to enjoy that Trent Reznor does all of Fincher's scores.
Yeah. Oh man, I am so excited. I was not I did not have any expectations for the new Tron movie, but then when they announced that Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails were doing
Mhm.
the score for it, I was like, okay, you got me. Crap.
I mean, I don't understand a world where they didn't have you at Tron, but that's. I was like, they said Tron,
Well,
and I'm like,
because
take my money, take my
I'm not
money.
big on Jared Leto, and that's why.
Oh, I like Jared Leto, who's a
I know
Fincher
you do.
guy. He's in both Panic Room and Fight Club. But yeah, I do it's he was one of the first people that Fincher was one of the first people they talked to for Star Wars Episode 7. And his thing was he goes, I would love to do Star Wars. Do I get Final Cut? And they're like, of course not. He's like, I don't fucking want to do it.
Yeah, imagine a world though. That's
Where they let
that's like
Fincher
Lynch doing Return of the Jedi,
Yeah,
right?
it
Of
is.
the insane what if.
Here's the thing: Fincher wants to. He's a genre guy, but
Yeah.
often the genre stuff, that expense, they won't let him do. The biggest thing that and now I swear we'll get back to the movie, but the biggest thing that one of his big passion projects was he really wanted to do 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea at Disney. He really, really wanted to do it, and his pitch to them that obviously scared them was, I want it to be for kids, but kind of fucked up. He goes, in the way that like Empire Strikes Back kind of fucked me up as a kid, that's what I want.
Sure.
20,000 Leagues. Like still for kids, but not shying away from the darker aspects of it.
I mean, there was an era in which that Disney movies could do that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really exist anymore.
But
right?
that really scared them, and then it was gonna cost a fortune. But
Sure.
oh man, he was talking about Daniel Craig as Captain Nemo, and
Could have been good.
Could have been good. It would have been really interesting. That guy has flirted many times with, he was going to do Batman Year One at one point. He wanted, okay, the last one. He wanted to do Spider-Man, but he wanted to start with the death of Gwen Stacy. All right, there we go. Yeah, it's like
That's insane.
I
Okay.
want to do Spider-Man, but I want to find Spider-Man at his lowest, darkest moment, which is the very Finchery pitch.
I guess, but like, how do you even start there?
I don't know, but that was his whole thing. Was he's like, I want to, because Sony loved him. They were like, hey man, you made Panic Room. You want to do Spider-Man? He's like, I love Spider-Man. Let me do the darkest Spider-Man story I can.
Let us take a story that's very important for comic book readers, but is completely unknown to general audience. Start there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you could have done. I mean, maybe you could have done something like Spider-Man Blue, where like it uses that as I don't know. We're not here to
as a
litigate
framing
that.
device.
Yeah,
That's
maybe that could be
actually not a bad idea.
Maybe that was his idea. I don't know anything beyond that. But anyway, he's run himself out of he's come close to doing a lot of stuff because he likes that stuff. But obviously, so anyway, though, but I don't think this is a case. I mean, we know it's not a case of like Fincher could have made a great Alien movie if he had the resources and stuff like that. It's like, I don't think he's a bad fit for this franchise. I also don't mind this. I don't necessarily have a problem with this franchise getting darker, that the third movie is way darker. That's not necessarily a problem. But it doesn't, like I think you're dead on about like, this doesn't feel like the third part of this story.
No, this feels like a nail in a coffin, not necessarily the last triumphal note of a trilogy, right? And even if the last note ends on a bleak, Ripley has to kill herself to stop this thing.
I'm not against that in concept at all.
Yeah. It's just that it doesn't feel of a piece with the rising action. When considered as a trilogy, right? And that's maybe why we come at it a little bit more harshly than other people might, because when it comes to the Alien franchise, I think the first one that maybe was released in which you and I were both like engaged with pop culture on a level where we could recognize that it was coming out was Resurrection.
Definitely.
I wasn't aware of Alien 3 because I was 4 when this movie came out.
Yeah, same here. I remember, I have memories of seeing the shaved head Ripley, which did kind of become iconic, even if this movie didn't. Sigourney Weaver with the shaved head definitely was like, which I also love that story. Sigourney Weaver, when she first met David Fincher, she was like, what do you see for Ripley in this movie? And he just thought and went, I don't know, bald?
All right. Well,
Yeah.
look, call Ridley Scott in a few years, and we'll get Demi Moore on the line.
Well, I
We'll
do
do the
think it's
same
very
thing.
interesting that we had two different bald head female action heroes within the same decade. Because G.I. Jane, that was also a big deal. It was like, oh, beautiful women are shaving their head to kick ass. G.I. Jane is a better movie than this. I'll say that. I don't think it's a great movie, but
Wow.
it's a better movie
It
than this.
it immediately gets a star on my book because it's got Viggo Mortensen in it. So.
That's right. I forgot. I don't think we've talked about Vigo. We haven't had a reason to talk about Vigo on this show yet. But
I mean, he's got a scarce career, but
yeah.
know that given an opportunity, I'll leap on talking about him.
Oh, I know. You're a big Vigo fan. And look, I can't blame you. I also love Vigo.
My captain, my king.
Yeah. Someday when we get to the season about non-superhero comic book adaptations, I can talk about A History of Violence, which is one of my favorite movies ever. Because of course,
and when we get to our horse season, I can talk about Hidalgo.
Man, that's like 30 years from now, and I'm like, I don't know, horse movies. Is that a thing?
Black Stallion,
no.
Seabiscuit. The season writes itself.
I have talked about. I do want to get more into like subgenres and stuff too, and looser
horse movies.
Horse movies. Write in if you want horse movies on the show.
War Horse.
Oh yeah, talk about Spielberg. But yeah, I think that's the big thing here, right? Is that just I don't think anyone was psyched about this. I think people liked elements of this, but they just wanted an Alien 3, and they kind of didn't care what it was. And
the producers,
that's what I mean. The studio at Fox, they needed a hit. They're like, everybody likes this Alien movies, and this movie did well.
I haven't looked at the box office.
It did. It did pretty well. I think it made 150 worldwide.
On a budget of what?
159 worldwide on a 50 million budget. So I mean,
okay,
good.
That's not terrible.
But it's one of those movies that's like, okay, yeah, money wise, it did pretty well. But there was just a sour taste.
Yeah, and it wasn't like the box office smash they were hoping for.
No, and like the first two were both cultural impacts, right? Like everybody was obsessed with them. This one, a lot of people saw, but I think in the general feeling was pretty negative about this movie. And looking at reviews at the time, there were some defenders, but even the defenders are pretty faint in their praise.
It's like tepid praise, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is on Fincher's visuals.
Mm-hmm. And there's some good looking stuff in this. Like, look, the shot of Ripley's face with the alien like right up next to her, like that's pretty iconic at this point.
Yes. And and fun note about that, the studio vehemently didn't want him to do that because it was going to be too expensive. He had to fight like hell. In fact, they told him not to do it, and he just shot it anyway. And then it ended up being most of the marketing campaign for the movie.
Yeah, of course.
That became the key moment of the trailer and stuff like that. Yeah, it's one of the most iconic images in the franchise. And they were like, no, don't shoot that. And he was like, fuck you, I'm going to shoot it anyway. But yeah,
well, that's Fincher.
Most of it is, but I will say the big thing I see when I just look through, I'm just on Metacritic, just sort of like looking at the blurbs and just trying to see. The thing I see most commonly among these is just been there, seen it before. Fincher shoots the hell out of it, but this movie's offering nothing new.
It feels like a big retread of the first movie in ways where if you're looking for this to be a continuation of a franchise, it feels like a big step backwards. And the only thing that's improved here is maybe some gore effects that weren't there when Ridley Scott was at the helm.
Yeah. Oh, and in fact, they had to cut out a lot of the gore because apparently the people were getting sick at test screenings.
Well, let's leave in the bit where the guy gets diced by a fan, though.
Oh, that's fine. But like, apparently there was the autopsy scene of Newt went on for a longer stretch and was considerably more graphic.
I mean, that is the single most upsetting scene in the film, in my opinion, because you're literally digging into the corpse of the heart of the last movie.
Yeah. And there was much longer and more gruesome version of it, apparently. That apparently people at test screenings were walking out on and stuff.
I mean, that feels like a Fincher thing to me, and I don't necessarily like that, but
well, it's a Fincher thing that works in like 7. You know what I mean? Like
sure.
that impulse can work when you're making a dank serial killer movie.
But
It
when you're
wouldn't.
literally
Yeah.
like beating the dead horse
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the franchise, it
Fincher's
feels
never shied
gratuitous.
away from disturbing imagery, by God. No,
Sure.
but yeah, that's the thing is it doesn't. Yeah, it's. This is the wrong place for that.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. I don't know. Yeah, maybe it without Ripley, and it's just about the prison. And I could totally imagine a movie where it's like Weyland Yutani wants to test something, so they put this alien in a prison, and these are expendable people.
Sure, totally. And look, as the Alien franchise has gone on and we've gotten into weird eldritch corners of it,
Yeah.
and thank you Ridley Scott for doing that, I guess.
Well,
We've gotten away from the like corporate malfeasance chunk of the franchise that I think is a strong untapped piece of the Alien franchise that has been explored in like comics and novels and stuff, but not really
from
the
what I
films as
gather,
much.
is the whole pitch for the Noah Hawley TV show. Is this going to be Weyland Yutani centric?
Okay.
Ignoring everything that's in Prometheus and Alien Covenant.
And look, Prometheus obviously does lean on
Yeah.
the name literally Weyland.
Like the Weyland is a character in it, of course.
But like corporate banal evil is
Yeah.
something you and I both vibe with in terms of like genre storytelling.
It's such a ongoing trope in science fiction for a reason. Because it feels very visceral, right? We all sort of, I mean, or at least a lot of us in the circles we travel in have a healthy distrust of massive corporations and capitalistic impulses. So it's perfect for that. Yeah, and just the idea about they just don't care.
Well, it's what makes Burke and Ash in the last two movies effective villains, because they're doing something for a purpose that we can't comprehend.
And that's the thing
is like greed, right? Like they lack empathy, so that's why we identify with Ripley.
That's like where Gaelic is the Paul McGann character. That would have been interesting to have a villain who wasn't coming out from that, but was coming out from this dark, awe-inspired, by him. The other thing I like that Paul McGann said, this movie's such a mess that he said they'd been shooting for a while, and then Fincher came up to him and goes, "You gotta lose the accent." He was doing an American accent, and it's like, studio doesn't want it. He goes, "We've already shot a bunch with this. Like, doesn't matter. They need it gone now." So he goes,
and it bounces around in the movie.
He goes, "I've shot parts of the movie as an American. I shot parts of it with my very Liverpool accent." And I was just going like, is any of this going to cut together and make sense? I don't know.
And here's the thing. He's like, his reduced role in the film is as such that because he's just another skinny, bald white guy, you don't know the difference.
Right. It doesn't matter. You don't even, just like, it doesn't, yeah. But I'm saying this movie lacks, and I'm glad you mentioned the Weyland Yutani thing as well, because they try to jam that in right at the end. But it feels forced.
It feels incredibly forced, like, especially when they bring in Lance Henriksen as real Bishop. But I don't know.
He says, "I'm the guy that Bishop is based on. I'm the creator of the Bishop line."
But then when he gets hit in the head with a pipe, he's got a big flap hanging off of his face. His ear falls off, and it's still attached to a big chunk of skin.
And what does it matter? Why would he lie about that?
Just to gain Ripley's trust?
But she says, "I know you're a Bishop model. I know you're the same model as Bishop." And he's like, "No, I'm human." I don't know. Why would that make him...
Because Weyland Yutani knows that Ripley doesn't trust synthetics.
Except for Bishop, but she also doesn't trust Weyland Yutani.
Also, how would they know that Bishop is a friendly face? Like, when they don't have the details of what happened?
Yeah, because that just happened, right? Like
on LV-426. I mean, it's tough to say because hypersleep can really
it's supposed to
make
be
time elastic.
It's supposed to be some amount of time, but like a couple years, I think, but not the same amount of time as the first movie, where it was like a long time. What was it? Like
Alien to Aliens is like 50 years.
Yeah. And I think this is supposed to be like 5-ish, but it doesn't really matter. Like, it's a huge, obviously, plot point of... And Lance Henriksen said he only agreed to appear as a personal favor to producer Walter Hill, and to this day says he intensely dislikes the movie.
Yeah, and like I like the Bishop stuff where she's reactivating him. Mm-hmm. I thought that was pretty good. I think the puppet work there is really good.
Yeah. And it gets us a little bit more Bishop, a character we actually like, unlike any of these new characters, who will all die, and I don't care. like I said, I felt the most kind of bad for Charles S. Dutton because he's the only one who's in the movie long enough and has some kind of character to play.
Yeah, he plays this religious leader for all of these convicts, and he saves Ripley from getting raped at one point.
Oh, which I know,
And
that's another thing I thought is like, oh man, this is what this franchise needed, the threat of sexual violence.
which is implicit when you have a woman introduced into an male population.
Well, because it's
right?
the whole thing about Charles Dance being like, I can't send you out there because they haven't seen a woman for years.
Yeah, but then Charles Dance is playing it like super weird, and then we find out that he's just a morphine addict who accidentally killed some people, but they're acting like he's some monster.
Yeah. And he's Charles Dance, so immediately you do expect him to be up to evil deeds.
Yeah. That's fair.
But I feel like he's totally wasted, though. Like I said, when he died, I was like, oh, what the fuck? What?
Yeah, you expect him to be the Hicks of this movie.
Yeah.
Instead, he dies at the end of Act 2.
Yeah. And just like, yoink.
He just gets pulled up into the rafters and his head gets a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's depressing and grim and bleak. And like, obviously that's what Fincher is going for, at least to a certain extent.
Well, that's what that number one, that is what they don't obviously know that yet. That is kind of what you hire Fincher to do. But it's just a thing too, where it's like, you could make an Alien movie with that vibe. The problem is they also want to make 6 other Alien movies at the same time. They just don't know what they want. And
the point I keep circling back to is that this movie just doesn't seem to have a theme beyond alien bad.
No, I agree. That's the thing where I also agree with you on. I'm not as big a defender of it as you are, but I agree that Resurrection has more of a there's a more clear vision of that movie at the very least. Although that's also a mess for other reasons as we've talked about.
Totally.
But I think
I will only defend Resurrection so far.
Right. No, it's still, all of this pales in comparison to the first 2 movies. Like I really think similar. I feel very similar to the Alien franchise I do about the Terminator franchise, where it's like, I just don't think you're just gonna keep trying to claw back to those first 2 movies that are masterpieces. And
well, Terminator has the added problem time travel, so we can literally there, right?
Oh my God. And I think definitively, and we'll do a Terminator season, of course we have to. But I think the thing with that is, at this point, and I think Alien is coming close to this, is like, I think you've done every variation you can on restarting this franchise.
Yeah.
Alien hasn't quite gotten there yet, but the idea being, they were already like, Ridley Scott and stuff was interested in potentially coming back already on this, only because I want to explore the origins, which is a weird impulse.
It's a weird impulse to explore the origins of a thing that is scarier when it's unknown, right?
Well, I think that's another thing too that I was thinking with this, and it's one of the reasons why. And you saw it and liked it, and I'm certainly open to Romulus. But one of the reasons I was turned off by the trailers was I'm like, I'm not really afraid of these things anymore. They're just too commonplace, and that this movie very much suffers from that. Where I'm just like, I've seen the xenomorph now chase. We had one and it was terrifying, and then Cameron. That's the thing that's so brilliant about the second movie. Cameron knows he can't recreate the fear of the first movie, so he's like, all right, it's a lot of them.
Yeah, and this movie suffers from the fact that we also introduced this plot point of, well, the alien won't kill Ripley because she's infected with the Queen, right?
Yeah, right.
And so that immediately like undermines certain stakes in the film that, while you, the watcher, are seeing Sigourney Weaver try to process this and like, okay, she's clearly upset because alien bad, we know this, but like how she goes about like figuring out herself after that fact of like the whole attempted, like, you got to kill me, but I won't commit suicide until the very end of the movie when I will commit suicide. And what is it that pushes her over the edge to actually commit to that? I don't know.
Yeah, you know what I love is the effects guys going like, hey, we worked hard on that chest burster on Ripley. I just wish the fucking optical of the fire behind her looked better. Like, I love you effects guys, because you just will be like, really blew it, man. And it does look like shit. They're right.
Oh, I mean, it looks like a screensaver.
Yeah, it looks real bad. Even by 1992 standards, it looks real bad.
Also, we saw the molten lead being poured. It didn't look like that.
Oh, by the way, they went back and forth on this ending so much because they're like, oh, it's kind of like the end of Terminator 2.
I mean, it's exactly the end of Terminator 2.
And then they basically like work their way, can we do something else, to finally just going like, oh, no, we will just do that then.
I mean, I'm glad she didn't like give a thumbs up on the way down, but
Well, the thing is, though, that has actual impact, though, in Terminator 2. That scene really works.
yeah.
And
no,
here,
totally,
I mean, the in concept, the idea that she would kill herself as a middle finger to the corporation is not a bad in concept ending to the character of Ripley.
But then you have this whole like drawn out dramatic sequence where she does the backwards Christ dive and then like embraces the thing that is erupting out of her chest like a mother, and then is drawing it down into the flames with her. And like there's empty symbology here that the movie has not earned.
Well, they talked about, I think the original idea was she was like choking it, or like murdering it as she's going.
That would have been way worse, but yeah.
It's just like, but the whole thing just it's once again, these aren't bad ideas. Talk about a movie where you guys just need to put the pause, delay this thing a year, and try to figure out something else. Because, this is just a cart before the horse movie, which we've seen many of, and we will continue to see more of on. And also studio meddling. Oh boy, will we get into studio meddling in some later Predator movies.
Oh, yeah.
We'll talk about another filmmaker this is not the last time a filmmaker will have disowned one of these movies. So
it's so interesting the parallels between these franchises, just in terms of you had something good, and then you fucked with it until it wasn't. We're only just now starting to like claw our way back into what makes these viscerally exciting to audiences, and how do we like get back to that feeling.
It's a really interesting trend we see a lot in Hollywood, which is where you think like if something's a hit, you would think the studio would be like, well, clearly that's working, we should just be hands off. I always think about Spider-Man 3 as an example of this too. It's like, clearly Raimi knows what he's doing, but no, the third one is the one they muck with the most. It's a weird thing where they're like, this is successful, we better get involved then. You're like, that feels like counterintuitive thinking, right?
Well, it's this producer mindset that you hear described a lot of the time in interviews with directors and writers, and that's this idea of the studio producers wanting to justify their own existence, but also acknowledging that they had a hand on the ball to something that might be successful, right? They want to say like, oh, well, I helped shepherd this thing that was a hit into existence. And the thing about that is a lot of the producers who are the best at that, you never hear about, because they're so hands-off with their movies.
Right.
Like there are rare exceptions, like a Kevin Feige or a Kathleen Kennedy.
But those are people who are managing things larger than one movie, right?
Yeah.
That's a new kind
Kathleen
of
Kennedy, like obviously overarching Star Wars, but like as a producer, the vast bulk of her career was shepherding projects of like Spielberg and a lot of the Amblin folks and whatnot.
Absolutely. But it's an interesting thing where there's a new kind of producer, which is like a Kevin Feige, where it is like the producer has now become the auteur, right?
But that impulse to try to steer a ship so that you can then claim credit for its eventual victory has always been there, and it has led to some disastrous decisions.
Well, and money, the amount of money getting higher and higher. Oh, I didn't share my other favorite little anecdote that came from the documentary, because obviously it was such a undertaking for Sigourney Weaver to actually shave her head. She had a clause put in her contract that should they require her to shave her head again for reshoots, they owed her an extra $40,000. And they said, that's fine. There's no way. We'll get it all. Come to reshoots, they go, okay, we're going to need to shave her head. And so then what they ended up doing was they balanced out $40,000 for her. How much would it cost to make a really good bald cap? And so they spent $16,000 on the most meticulously created bald cap. That is astounding because it's in the movie and you can't tell. But they talked to the makeup people who talk about, like, we spent a full week just stitching individual hairs to be the stuff, because her head's not completely clean shaven. So they had to make a bald cap and then individually sew in hair by hair to make that stubble. And then they had to melt it. He goes, to this day, it is the most complex prosthetic thing I've ever worked on.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was all just to avoid an additional.
Yeah, because they were like,
24K.
okay, that's really expensive, but it's less expensive than what we'll have to pay Sigourney to shave her head again.
Well, hey, those makeup and prop people got some work, so I'm
It's
happy
true,
for
but
them.
it sounds like, I mean, that would just be a week, every day, all day, and you're just stitching a hair. My God.
I mean, that goes back to like old tapestry making techniques
it's
where it's
really,
like
yeah.
100 monks spent 5 years alone in a monastery making this work so the king of France could have a pretty thing on the wall.
Yeah. It's but you're just like, oh my God, the movie is just this thing was doomed, man.
No,
Just
like
the
you said,
wrong
it did
impulse.
okay.
It did okay, but it wasn't the studio saving, smash that they were like, well, we know that if anything else bombs, don't worry, we've got Alien 3. That's a guaranteed monster of a hit. But this movie. This movie was never going to be that. This movie's a bummer. If you're going to a big summer sci-fi film, boy, you're leaving pretty depressed out of this one. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not a very appealing mainstream movie.
Maybe if you release this in October as like a Halloween scare fest thing.
Yeah.
But as a summer tentpole blockbuster, absurd.
When did this come out? This was a summer movie, wasn't it?
No. The way you're talking about it, I assumed it was.
I think, May 22nd, 1992. Big summer.
Ooh.
Big summer blockbuster. Early
summer opener, even.
Yeah, because that would have been, that wouldn't have been now where summer starts in April or whatever it is that they do now.
Summer starts in December sometimes.
Here's a game I like to play. What were the big movies of 1992?
The big movies of 1992. Let's think here.
I mean, I know Batman Returns. Oh, yeah,
Batman Returns.
That was the number one movie of the year. Was Batman Returns. Lethal Weapon 3, a much more fun third movie.
Twins? No, Twins is before this.
Twins is that's like late 80s. But on that same note, back when a comedy could hit and explode, Sister Act is number 3.
Sister Act. Huh.
Whoopi. This is a time when Whoopi is a major name above title.
Sure, yeah.
You know what Fox's big hit of that year was? It wasn't this. It was Home Alone 2 Lost in New York.
Famously starring ex-president, felon, and rapist Donald Trump. Yeah.
I immediately always jump to the John Mulaney bit about Lost in New York. You can't get lost in New York. It's a grid, motherfucker. Wayne's World was the number 5 as well.
Huh.
So, I mean, people are looking for fun. Where's Alien 3 in this? Alien 3 is number 27.
Yeah.
The 27th highest grossing. Just above Hook, a movie I love. I love that movie.
Hook is one of those films that lives and dies on the kids who watch VHS copies of
100%, because friend of the show, Brendan Jones, is like, I saw that shit, it was terrible. And I'm like, I saw that, yes, on VHS, and kids, everyone in our generation is like, oh, Hook. But I feel like anyone who was an adult at that time was like, that sucked. But you know what? I watched the 4K when it came out. Still works, man. That movie's great. I love that movie. Rufio! Bangarang! Yeah. So, people were... I'll just say, I bring this up only because even as dark as like Batman Returns is, it's not bleak. It's not depressing. No. It's weird. It's gothic and strange, but it's still fun.
Yeah. Look, when your third act ends with like missiles strapped to penguins, there's only so much darkness that it's involved.
So this opened the week after Lethal Weapon 3, and I think just that's what people, that's big. It's fun. It's funny.
Lethal Weapon ate this thing's lunch money.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It made like $100 million more than this. All right, let's talk about some differing opinions on it, though. I'll start with the low because that's more where we are at with this, as I always do on here.
I'm sensing there might be someone with a slightly more hyperbolic take than either.
Yeah. How about this? This comes to us from, oh boy, you love to hear from him, Daytona Bob.
Oh, Daytona Bob.
Daytona
Welcome
Bob.
back.
Yeah, that's right. Fan favorite Daytona Bob. Who titles his review, should have been called Alien Third Rate.
Hey, buzzing.
Yeah, he'll be appearing up at the Catskills every Friday at, boy.
Tip your waiters.
Yeah, I'll be here all week, folks. The funny thing about this movie, and I don't mean funny, ha, but that the acting is good, the sets are okay, but what really reeked in this movie was the plot. I mean, this, keep in mind, all caps, I mean, it really sucked. This is science fiction. You can do anything, all caps again. Yet they had to revert to the same old plot used in the first movie, which is one of the best science fiction horror movies ever made, if not the best horror movie ever made. Trapped with no weapons. Yeah, that's always up for debate, but certainly on the list. Trapped with no weapons. Oh, geez, give me a break. Quick note here about this is me talking, not the review. One of the things I like in the William Gibson script is that movie also they have no weapons because they're on a science research station. But what that means is Hicks has to improvise weapons as a soldier to fight the alien, which is pretty fucking cool.
John, we can't have fun things in a third Alien movie.
Yeah.
Stop it.
It forces him to use his brain as a soldier to fight the thing, which I thought was, I'm like, good stuff. That's good stuff, man.
You can't pitch me MacGyver versus Alien and then walk that back to this. Good
yeah,
God.
because I just like, we don't have any guns. Like, what do you have that's like a gun? He's like, oh, that's fucking cool, man. That movie, it would have been cool. I don't know if it would have been great, but it would have been cool. As I said, you could do anything. Meet the original race, go to another ship, make the story a few years later, and this piece of dreck makes watching the second Aliens, which I consider the best sequel with a plot arc that makes sense ever made, sort of worthless because you know no one gets out alive. I'm putting some, but that's what I imagine.
You're putting some stank on it. Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, you have to perform these. One of the endearing qualities to Aliens was Ripley saving Newt and then forming a mother-daughter bond, wherein Ripley says you won't let anything happen to her. And on top of that, give me a break! That's all caps once again. How did the alien plant eggs? Once again, me talking. I'm fine with that, because that was in the Gibbs. That's fine. The alien could have left an egg on the ship. Sure.
Sure, I think this guy needs to lay off the caps more.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was leaning on the caps lock. The alien plants embryos in the sleeping people? How lame is that? Where did they come from? The alien queen was dead.
It's in the movie.
Did an alien manage to jump on the shuttle, plants eggs it was carrying, and then die? Or WTF? Made no sense, not at all. So yeah, the photography's good, the acting is good, the storyline was unbelievable, and we are talking science fiction here. And it basically comes across as a mess with no real direction and definitely no plot arcs that make you suspend your disbelief. I give it a 1 and was trying to figure out how to give it a -10. 1 out of 10 stars.
Damn it, IMDb. Why won't you let me put negative numbers?
Son of a bitch! Okay, so for the positives, I will say there is a lot of people who are really arguing for if you watch the assembly cut. That's a big.
Again, having seen the assembly cut, like, it doesn't transform this film.
Like I said, I think it's a more cohesive film unto itself, but it does not solve any of the problems we've been talking about.
Yeah,
I think there are things in it. Like I said, I think actually the Paul McGann bit is the most interesting thing in it to me. Just in terms of, but like excised from this as just an idea in an alien movie. All right,
sure.
Well, how about we hear from Lord? Hold on. Let's hear from Lord Blacklist.
All hail.
All hail. Who titles this "The Tragic End"? Period. Put a period in the title. That's there.
If the term Shakespearean is used in this, I'm walking away, John.
Looking at Alien 3 as the final film in a trilogy, I have to say that it is one of the better final acts in film history, even though it is perhaps not the final act that many would have wanted. If you follow this guideline for a trilogy, Part 1 sets up the story, Part 2 expands on it, taking it new and interesting places, and Part 3 brings closure, then Alien 3 works just fine. I think of this film as a tragedy, Ripley loses everyone she ever cared about. Her situation is bleak. The setting is grim. Where Alien was subtle and Aliens was flamboyant, Alien 3 is more thematic. It's me speaking. Not really. In fact, we talked
Alien
about
bad.
it.
Yeah,
we talked about it. It actually sort of lacks for themes. Anyway, but I guess Lord Blacklist rejoined to us is this next part, Gergoni, when he says, much is present in the subtext. There is much religious and symbolic imagery to be digested. It's a very layered film that requires several viewings to take it all in. Again, Sigourney Weaver gets much praise for her performance in Aliens, but here I believe she does her best work of the series. How does someone react when everything has been taken from them? What has their life amounted to? What was it all for? These are all questions posed by the film and to her character, and it is not an easy thing to play. The film has a... would you pronounce it elegiac? I've never known.
I can't see the word you're reading, John.
Sorry. Elegiac. I know the word, but I don't know that I can actually say it.
Elegetic?
Maybe something like that. Anyway.
Because it's trying to be as an elegy?
Yeah, yes, that's exactly the point there. That is what they mean. I don't know the
right.
I don't see that written a lot. I swear I'm a smart person, folks. That is absolutely unrelenting. The extended version of the film is much more layered, so they also prefer the extended version, but they're talking in general. That is both movies. But here is one thing that really differentiates Aliens 3 from its predecessors, especially in the special edition. It is almost solely focused on character, to the point of the alien not being all that dominant in terms of screen time and moments of suspense. Me, again, kind of a big problem. And actually, the character work is pretty bad, I think. But anyway.
The whole character work that Ripley is doing is in conversation with the xenomorph itself,
right.
Which is why it should be a bigger presence.
Yeah. All right, back to the review. The thematic elements of the film are very dominant. Life, death, faith, and internal conflict. Many religious allegories are made, with the most obvious being the last temptation of Ripley at the hands of Bishop 2. The score in this film, by the way, that is what Lance Henriksen is credited as, by the way, is Bishop 2.
Right.
Which is a weird, also, continues to make me not understand that character. The score in this film is much more dominant than either of the previous films, and there's a greater emphasis on the characters' faces rather than set design and technology. Breaking out of the reviews a second, I actually think the score is very good. Elliot Goldenthal, but I will say one of the other pieces of trivia I got from this that's made me very sad for him, because they kept changing the ending, he had 1 day to write the last piece of music.
Yikes.
Yeah. He said he had to pull an all-nighter to write the final piece of music because the ending kept changing.
I could use less of the rockin' 90s guitar that's
not the part I'm talking about, but like,
yeah, I know.
His darker, somber moments in this I think are pretty solid. And he ends up going to the Batman franchise after this, which I will say, my issues with the Schumacher movies aside, I actually think his Batman score is really good in those movies.
Batman and Robin, weirdly, I think has the best score of the bunch, in my opinion.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but because of Elfman all the way. But I think Goldenthal is really good and actually does build on what Elfman was doing, weirdly, in those movies where it kind of doesn't deserve it. Anyway, Alien 3 seems more personal than the other films, perhaps because it centers entirely on Ripley's character. Several other memorable characters are introduced, like Clemens, the soft-spoken doctor, and Dylan, the religious leader. Gaelic is a fascinating character whose entire character arc was cut from the theatrical version, but thankfully is in the special edition. Alien 3, here we go. Alien 3 is a difficult film for a mass audience because it doesn't have the horror or action elements of the first and second that an audience can easily latch onto. Once again, breaking out of the review, yes, these are movies made for an audience who likes those things. That's not a good thing. You're not better than... All right.
Just power through, John. Just power through.
It is a film about loss and internal conflict. Not exactly the stuff one thinks of with popular entertainment. But I've always looked at the Alien trilogy as more than just the movies. Alien 3 has its flaws, mainly the looming question of where the alien egg at the beginning of the film came. Okay, both guys focused on that. But then again, we never found out where the ship in the first film came from, did we? The film,
Mm.
the did we really got me. The film gives such a sense of completion and finality to the series that I wish no more installments had been made after. It is one of the best endings in film history, but seeing David Fincher's subsequent work with Seven, The Game, and Fight Club, great endings are a trend in his films. This is a very rewarding film, but not an easy one to watch if you were looking for mindless entertainment. There are greater ideas and themes at play in Alien 3. Watching the first three back-to-back as a trilogy creates an amazing experience, much like following a well-loved character through a series of novels, sharing in their hardship and triumph as they go along. 10 out of 10 stars.
But
Thoughts?
this movie undercuts all the triumph.
Yeah.
Okay. I thank God they didn't use the term Shakespearean. I
was
have walked
waiting
away
for
from
it
my
too, right?
microphone.
Like, yeah.
But I don't know. I feel such
Elegaic, though, is pretty fucking snooty.
yeah. There is a piece of me that agrees that media literacy is sort of a lost art form when it comes to the general like movie-going masses,
Sure,
right?
sure.
And that piece of me is snooty by definition. I'm gonna push the glasses up my nose and go like, well, if you stop and like think, just watch the movie and understand the themes that are happening here. But calling a given film thematic,
Yeah.
seems to be a use of a word that I'm like, you're using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Yeah.
Because just because something is moody and bleak doesn't mean that it's thematic. Thematic,
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, by the way, the thematic is also so broad, right? Like almost everything is thematic in that pretty much any story you tell, whether you intend them or not, themes are going to present themselves. So the idea about like he's using it as like thematic, meaning more about theme, right? Like he's saying like focused primarily on theme, is I think what he means by a thematic story. But like,
sure, but I think of a movie like The Northman, right?
Yes.
When I think of thematic, that is a movie that lives and dies by vibes. The story it's telling is super basic, but the emotions it is attempting to evoke are part of the themes of the film.
I think Fincher's made several other movies. I don't know if you saw The Killer, his most recent film. That's a heavily thematic film. Yeah, I'm not shocked that I loved it and you didn't see it, but that's a heavily thematic film that one could say is somewhat, or has a very, very, very simple plot, but is more about the themes of the life of someone who takes lives and what that does to you, the dispassionate way that someone lives, that sort of thing, right? Same thing with even Seven. As much as Seven is, it's really about the weight of confronting horror through the Morgan Freeman character.
And there is something to talking about the subtext of Alien 3 as something that people just don't get, right? But the problem is the subtext is compromised by the ramshackle nature in which the story was created. So any subtext you're reading into this film is an invention of yours, and sometimes that's true regardless of the film.
Oh, absolutely. The idea that the filmmakers are credited all the time with like, I don't think these 27 things you've noticed were all intentional. They just couldn't be. But but the other thing is, I think the thing I would really push back on is especially like the religious stuff, where it's like, yeah, that's in there, but it doesn't mean anything. There's a lot of religious imagery, but I'm not sure it really comes down to much. Weirdly, the cut stuff with McGann is close to, but still isn't really. Like you talk about, that's sort of the abyss staring back. But I will also say,
there's a cast-off line from Dance where he's just like, oh, there's some apocalyptic like doomsday cult.
Yeah.
And none of that plays in the movie. They're just like vaguely
like the whole movie. All of these are interesting ideas that you could imagine a movie doing something with. This movie isn't that movie. The other thing that I will say, and I will, we're both fans of the podcast Blank Check, but I will say I vehemently disagree with their review of this movie, which is fine. We're entitled to our opinions, but they seem to take, and I think I saw this in a lot of reviews, there's a lot of praise for this movie for being actively non-commercial and mainstream. That's metal. That it took balls to kill Newt. you know.
I mean, there's a punk rock attitude you can bring to films, right? So as soon as you're rebelling against the establishment, suddenly there is worth in pure anarchic like struggle against what is supposed to be, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to view this film through that lens, I guess, yeah. But also, they killed Newt.
Yeah. Like, if that's your attitude, that's great. Also valid is my emotional reaction of how dare you, right? Like, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, sure, man. But I've never been, that nihilism is not something I vibe with. And that feels very nihilistic to me.
I can grapple with the ideas of characters, especially villainous characters, who are pushed so far beyond an emotional edge that they see no value in the world. Right? I think there's something compelling about that.
And once again, I think something Fincher explores better in several other movies he's made.
Totally. I agree. Like, look, I don't like his spoopy killer movies, but I have seen Seven. I have seen Zodiac. Like, these are films I have absorbed. And I think he does a really good job of analyzing, like, what is it that creates inhuman evil?
And by making, but as you're saying, in antagonists, because you have protagonists, the story is about protagonists wrestling with confronting that.
Right. When the film itself is trying to make that its underlying statement, if it even is, because again, this reviewer maybe is supposing that, about how like this is everything torn away from Ripley, and maybe that there would be some triumph in her like having one last bit of freedom in the destruction of her own life and the xenomorph inside of her as this last like fuck you to the company that has slowly destroyed her life, if that was a bigger part of the movie and not just thrown in the last 10 minutes.
No, that ending, because it was literally they had no ending for this movie. And I often quote the last line of Seven that I think is the which is, and it's not just an excuse to do a Morgan Freeman impression, I swear, but it is the some people say the world is a good place and it's worth saving. I agree with the second part. I feel like that's pretty indicative of the Fincher thing. Is like, yeah, man, there's nihilism and stuff like that, but I don't know, it's still worth trying to save.
Because this life is all we have, right? And like the pieces of art that express the temptation into darkness, I think are offering a contrast. They're not offering a thematic view on how life should be lived.
Right, yeah. Well, don't worry though, because folks, this isn't the end of the story. If you join us next week...
That's the funny part. Like, I'm getting all philosophical. Next week, we're talking about a movie where she says, nah, fuck that.
I mean, and a movie where you mentioned that for this one, but literally there is a quote from Sigourney Weaver about, I did this because a truckload of money showed up at my house. We went through like, hey, let's maybe make a third movie, to I definitely don't want to do it, but will because of the money.
Look, girl, get paid. That's great.
No question. I mean, Sigourney Weaver, and much more qualified people than we can talk about her importance as kind of one of the first women above title movie stars, right? That can open a big tentpole genre movie with Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah, well, it's that and then Whoopi.
Well, and Whoopi did it with the one name. That to me is the ultimate achievement of movie stardom. We can just say Whoopi, Sister Act. Sister Act is super fun.
That first one, yeah.
I can't remember last time I saw the second one, so I don't even know.
Back in the Habit.
Yeah, Back in the. I mean, that started with the title and they worked backwards, right? Like, because they're just like, that's too good not to use. So the tagline for next week's movie, as I always read, it's been more than 200 years. ... The beginning has just started.
That's bad.
Yeah, that's pretty dumb.
Whoa,
that's a bad
tagline. Whoa, that hit me, and I was just like,
the beginning has just started. What now?
Well, huh? But also fourth movie.
Yeah, but also this is the fourth one of these. I do remember that there was a distinct reaction, though, like you talked about, because we were conscious. I remember going to movies and seeing trailers for Alien Resurrection, and there was a distinct, even being a kid, you could feel the reaction of like, oh, Jesus.
They're trotting this back out? Oh,
God
man.
damn it. They've literally resurrected, the movie's called Resurrection. It is sort of like, what are you gonna do? And I think in my memory, and I haven't really started doing too much research for next week's show, but in my memory, this one was met, if this one like pissed people off, the third one, the fourth one was met with like I don't remember anyone getting too worked up either way about Resurrection.
Yeah, I don't remember, really.
I think it's and just spoiler alert, it's going to make about the same amount of money. So
look, I was more concerned with Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, we were doing that. But very interesting. We get another weird fucking choice of director for this movie. Surprisingly, the first time Joss Whedon has come up on the IP squad. So
yeah, and we get baby Winona Ryder. Well, not baby Winona, but
well,
pretty early in her career.
Yes, it's just because Winona Ryder's been acting forever. She is super young, but it's somehow still the middle of her career. Like,
that's fair.
Yeah. And I think this
is after Bram Stoker's Dracula. Wow.
Yeah, because that was also in the top 10 of the 1992 movies. Another movie that trounced this was Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was as weird as that movie is, like a massive financial hit. Which is crazy to me today, because that movie seems like the weirdest little art movie today. But not the first time we've talked about him, but a favorite certainly here on the IP squad. Ron Perlman, of course, is in that one as well.
I mean, look, we got all sorts of favorites on this. We got Brad Dourif, we got Ron Perlman.
I haven't watched this movie in several years, but a preview of what I think my opinion is. This one's like fun, right? Like, whereas this movie is 3 is so grim, Resurrection I remember at least being like kind of silly fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if
that's
it's
why
not
I
like
defend it.
It's a huge step down from the first two, but like I remember like enjoying the ride to some extent of Resurrection. So though I know it's also, and we'll talk about the director's hugely compromised vision. There's a lot of stuff there to be spoken of. But of course, if you want more from the IP squad, head over to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/punchupent. That's punchupent. There you can get cool exclusive bonus material from the show and all the shows on the Punch Up Entertainment Network. And Gergani, where else can people find the Punch Up Entertainment Network?
YouTube.
The YouTube.
YouTube.com/@punchupentertainment. There you can watch all of our shows.
I just like the idea of you saying that like somebody's dad going, I watched it on the YouTube.
Well, I'm always looking for a way to like mess with the syllables of words, and YouTube is a tricky one, right? So I had to go with the emphasis rather than syllables. But yeah, over there you can watch all of our shows, including May the Panel Be With You, where John and I talk about Star Wars comics. You can go check out our digs through other franchises on Campbell and Jones Meet the Monsters.
Indeed.
And while you're there, please like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell for notifications. We're releasing stuff every single day over here on the YouTube channel, including stuff you can only find on the YouTube channel, like Punch Up Plays, where Elliot Lewis and I are probably still playing through the Mass Effect franchise, because those games are long.
Yeah. Have you gotten through? You're not even through the first one.
Due to podcast time travel, I have no idea. So let's just say no.
Yeah, that's right. You may be through the first one by the time you're hearing this, because the show is recorded a few weeks in advance. So yeah. Anyway,
I know that game like the back of my hand, so like I'm not speed running us through it, but I'm definitely meandering less than I might have.
Yeah, I will say, that's a good note though for people who want to watch it. It's a quick watch. It's it's digestible content.
We're making our way, that's for sure.
Head over and check out all that stuff. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of the IP Squad. Until next week, the case file is closed.